Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and a very good afternoon to you. Welcome to Brazier, fast-paced news from 4 until 6. I am Alistair Stewart, covering for Colin again today. In the next hour, Steve Baker, the Tory MP who led the campaign to bring down Theresa May, has called for Boris Johnson to step down. Could the leading Brexiteer claim his second prime ministerial scalp? And as MPs continue to discuss Boris Johnson's future in Westminster, the Prime Minister is in India. We'll be discussing, is India an old ally or a potential future opponent siding with Russia? And riots have been spreading across Sweden for nearly 2 weeks now. You may well not have heard a word about it. A far-right politician has provoked a radical group of Muslims. Police have been attacked and cars set ablaze. Does Sweden have an integration problem? With me to discuss all of that and so much more, I'm delighted to be joined by a good friend of mine, Claire Fox, the Baroness of Buckley. So, between us and you, we have plenty to come. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news headlines. Here's Polly.
Alistair, thank you. Just after 4 o'clock, I'm Polly Middlehurst in the GB newsroom. And the top story today, the Met Police say there will be no further updates on Partygate fines until after May's local elections. The force says investigations into Downing Street and Whitehall parties will continue during the pre-election period, but no new statements will be issued. And the Prime Minister says he has absolutely nothing to hide as MPs debate whether to launch an investigation into claims he misled Parliament about lockdown breaches at Downing Street. That comes after the government withdrew its request today to delay the motion. Conservative MPs now have a free vote this afternoon. The Defence Secretary Ben Wallace saying Labour is playing political games.
Because I think there are so many investigations going on at the moment. The Seward report hasn't been published. The police haven't finished their investigations. And I think, dragging this into what is currently a sort of political punch and judy match by Keir Starmer doesn't actually get to the bottom of it. So let's get the Seward report, police investigation finished. And then as the government's amendment is put before the House today, it doesn't rule it out. It just says let's wait till it's completed.
And on a key day in the Commons, Boris Johnson is in India. He's there on a trade visit to strengthen ties with the country. The Prime Minister says he hopes a free trade agreement with India can be reached as soon as this autumn. He'll hold talks with his counterpart, Narendra Modi, tomorrow. The Foreign Secretary has announced a wave of new sanctions against Russia. Liz Truss says it'll affect those with Ukrainian blood on their hands. Earlier, the Russian military abandoned plans to storm a steel plant in Mariupol, where Ukrainian troops are holding out. President Vladimir Putin instead ordered the plant to be blockaded. And President Biden has announced a £612 million security package for Ukraine. It includes the delivery of long-range weapons, 144,000 rounds of ammunition and tactical drones. The president is also banning Russian-affiliated ships from US borders.
Now they've launched and refocused their campaign to seize new territory in eastern Ukraine. And we're in a critical window now of time where they're going to set the stage for the next phase of this war. And the United States and our allies and partners are moving as fast as possible to continue to provide Ukraine the forces that they need, the weapons they need, the equipment they need, their forces need to defend their nation.
Here, a mother, stepfather and a 14-year-old boy have been found guilty of murdering 5-year-old Logan Mwangi. The child's body was found dumped in the River Ogmore in Bridgend last July. John Cole, Angarad Williamson and the teenager were convicted at Cardiff Crown Court after 5 hours of jury deliberation. And the Children's Commissioner says smacking should be banned in England. Dame Rachel de Souza wants the law changed to ensure children and adults share the same protection from assault. The Education Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi, disagrees. He says parents are entitled to discipline their kids. The change would bring the law in line with Scotland and Wales. Northern Ireland is also yet to ban smacking. Sir Lewis Hamilton and Serena Williams have joined Sir Martin Broughton's bid to buy Chelsea Football Club. The 7-time Formula One world champion and former tennis world #1 are part of a consortium of high-profile investors looking to buy the Premier League club. Sir Martin, the former Liverpool FC chairman, has been on the shortlist to buy the club since Roman Abramovich put it up for sale after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And to mark Her Majesty the Queen's 96th birthday today, a 41-gun salute in Hyde Park in London to honour the occasion. That was just one of the 41 gun salute that took place today. Her Majesty, though, not in the capital, choosing instead to spend the day at Sandringham in Norfolk in a cottage loved by her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh. And a new photograph has been released to celebrate the Queen's birthday today. It was taken last month in the grounds of Windsor Castle, and Her Majesty is pictured with 2 of her white fell ponies. Happy birthday, Your Majesty. This is GB News. We'll bring more news as it happens. Now it's time for Al Stewart covering for Brazier.
Polly, thanks very much indeed. And just picking up on one quick story there in Polly's news, we'll be talking to one of the great voices of equestrianism, Nick Brooks-Ward, later on in the programme, about what those fell ponies and indeed every sort of horse means to Her Majesty the Queen, not only today on her birthday, but throughout her life. So don't miss that. That's Nick Brooks-Ward coming up a little later on in the programme. So a very warm welcome to the show all afternoon. MPs have been debating Labour's proposals to hold a Commons Privileges Committee inquiry into claims that the Prime Minister Boris Johnson misled Parliament over parties. Tory MPs, it has emerged today, will now be given a free vote on the issue after the government withdrew its amendment suggesting that Parliament should wait until the Sue Gray report and all police inquiries were over and Sue Gray's report published and all fines had been levied. I guess in reality it is an admission that the whips, the party enforcers, feared that they couldn't force all Conservative MPs to toe the line. Well, we soon knew why. Leading Tory Brexiteer Steve Baker, who just 2 days ago seemed to forgive the Prime Minister and suggest it was time to move on, dramatically changed tack. He said in the last couple of hours that after breaking, quotes, the letter and spirit of lockdown rules, the Prime Minister now should be long gone. He said, the gig's up. It was a long and moving speech in which Baker spoke about his desire to forgive the Prime Minister as a Christian and his admiration for Boris Johnson for getting Brexit over the line and defeating Jeremy Corbyn. But he also spoke about a constituent who could not be with his dying wife of 50 years. Here is how Baker concluded.
I have now got, having watched What I would say is contrition. Beautiful, marvellous contrition, isn't my sense of it? Is it rather, in a sense, only lasted as long as it took to get out of the headmaster's study? And that's not good enough for me, and it's not good enough for my voters. I'm sorry, it's not. And I'm afraid I'm now in a position where I have to acknowledge that if the Prime Minister occupied any other office of senior responsibility, if he was a Secretary of State, if he was a Minister of State, a Parliamentary Under-Secretary, a Permanent Secretary, a Director General, if he was a Chief Executive of a private company or a Board Director, he would be long gone. The reason that he is not long gone is because removing a sitting Prime Minister is an extremely grave matter, and goodness knows people will know I've had something to do with that too. It's an extremely grave matter, an extremely big decision, and it tends to untether history. And all of us should approach such things with reverence and awe and an awareness of the difficulty of doing it and the potential consequences, and that's why I've been tempted to forgive. But I have to say now, the possibility of that really, for me, has gone. I have to say I'm sorry that for not obeying the letter and the spirit, and I think we have heard that the Prime Minister did know what the letter was, the Prime Minister now should be long gone. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll certainly vote for this motion, but really, the Prime Minister should just know the gig's up.
Steve Baker, Member of Parliament there, as I say, speaking within the last couple of hours. The debate started around about lunchtime, and our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, has been watching every twist and turn, and I'm delighted to say that now joins me live from Westminster. I'm going to be blunt and say I don't believe that the memory of a constituent who could not be with his dying wife clinched it. What else happened in the last 48 hours that changed Baker's mind?
Well, it's the most extraordinary about turn. Very few were expecting Steve Baker to come out and say this today. We've heard a number of speeches from a number of people who have said similar critical things of the Prime Minister beforehand. It wasn't the biggest surprise to everyone, for example, that William Ragg, the Conservative Member of Parliament for Hazel Grove, announced that back in December he had sent in his letter. He's someone who had been very critical of the Prime Minister in the past. But with Steve Baker, this is someone who helped Boris Johnson become Prime Minister. This is someone who led the parliamentary troops in the Brexit wars. This is someone who organised the way that Parliament worked to engineer that referendum in the first place. This is someone who has been aligned with Boris Johnson for a long time. And also, quite importantly, a pretty devout Christian, and someone who spoke 2 days ago about the Christian virtue of forgiveness. But I think to some extent that religiosity has also played into that very clear idea of when someone has done right and when someone has done wrong. The biggest thing that I've been able to glean, speaking with MPs over the last few hours about what exactly went on between last night and at 11:10 this morning, just 20 minutes before the debate was about to start, the government pulled their amendment and released the requirement for a 3-line whip, gave Conservative MPs, in effect, a free vote, conceding in many ways that the Labour motion will pass. Well, why on earth did that take place? As far as I am aware, Conservative MPs who were given various assurances by the whips last night were not happy with the motion that was then produced. Conservative MPs were happy with the argument that the government made that this vote should be not taking place, or this investigation, I should say, this committee of the House of Commons investigation should not take place until Sue Gray's report has been published, until MPs have all the facts and knowledge at their fingertips. Well, it seems that the wording of the motion didn't live up to that promise, because it wasn't just an amendment that the government laid to delay that eventuality beyond Sue Gray. It was one that would have required a further vote. And to some MPs, that part of the government's amendment, the part that may well have allowed a confident government to wriggle out of the idea of having this inquiry at all, that was beyond the pale. And clearly, the numbers simply did not add up for the whips this morning. The first rule in politics, they say, is know how to count. And this government that was elected with a majority of 80 MPs, well, at least 40 of them would have had to have had words with the whips to say they would vote actively against the government. And when we're talking about 40 plus Conservative MPs being opposed to their government, we are getting into 1922 committee letter territory. And that is the big worry for this government going forward.
Brilliant analysis, Tom. Final quick point to you, and then I'm going to talk to quite a bit of that with Claire Fox, who's here in the studio with me. The final point is this, to be crystal clear in my mind, but much more importantly in those who are kind enough to be watching us on GB News TV and listening to us on radio. If they lose the vote in the House this evening, and that's by no means assured, as you just said with the numbers game, then, to quote Steve Baker back to him, the gig's not up yet. That committee then has to spend months looking into it and then come to a judgment. This could still drag on, even if Labour win the vote tonight at about 7 o'clock or whenever.
Certainly, we're expecting the vote at around 5 this evening, but we are also expecting that the Labour Party will win this vote. Many Conservative MPs have gone home. Of course, as I was saying, the whip has gone down to one line. The only Conservative MPs who are sticking around are really going to be those who are backing the Labour motion. Indeed, we're hearing whispers that some ministers may be backing the Labour motion. However, it must be said that this Labour motion has many, many concessions within it that the Labour Party thought necessary to win round the Conservatives. The biggest one, of course, is that the Labour Party has now conceded that this investigation would not take place until the Met Police conclude their investigation, which could be quite some time. Certainly not until after the local elections. Equally, they've also conceded that the chair of that committee, Chris Bryant, the Labour MP, would not adjudicate that investigation. So, still much more time to go on this. The vote tonight probably going Labour's way, but it doesn't mean immediate action.
Talk to you around 5. Tom, thank you very much indeed. Claire, you were listening very carefully to precisely what Steve Baker said, but also you were kind enough to be listening very closely to Tom Harwood. I listened to the beginning of the debate, and I'm no great fan of Keir Starmer, particularly as a parliamentarian. He's not a great orator. He's not a great charismatic leader. But he steeped this whole issue in the issues of honour and truthfulness. That's why all MPs are referred to as the honourable member, because it is assumed that they will tell the truth. He set it in a moral area, which Baker's bitten on.
I think that's true, but I also feel as though for people watching it, it sounds quite high-handed. You know, the ship has sailed on honourable at this point, and many people know that there was a mess, that the Partygate whole issue is a mess. And I think the national fury for many people has given way to a certain, oh, for God's sake, this is dragging on. And I'm afraid that although I can understand why, well, we can go back on why Steve Baker made the decision, but although you can see what's happening within Westminster, it feels very far detached, I think, from the concerns of voters, not because they're forgiving of Boris Johnson, but because they just feel in the set of priorities that we face as a country, yes, as a society, that this is one that feels like it's going to be in committee rooms forever, and there's whips involved, and there's votes, and there's all sorts of...
That was the thrust of my final point, even if it happens to...
It's going to drag on, you know.
There was a poll last weekend, which the Sunday Mail on Sunday published, and none of this was up there amongst the concerns that folk had. Folk were terrified, genuinely terrified, about how they were going to be paying their next electricity bill, which went up at the beginning of this month, and they're going to have to settle by the end of the month. Standing orders have gone up and the rest of it. That's what folk are worried about.
Yeah, and also there is a backdrop of quite a serious war in Europe going on, and I'm not saying that in the way that Boris Johnson does, as let me get on with the war. No. But I just mean there's big issues. Yeah. And also, I think, even in relation to the lockdown period, I think that it was a great coup, by the way, that GBNews had Matt Hancock on, and he was interrogated by one of your presenters last night.
Dan Wootton, we get all the big interviews clear on this channel.
But actually, it was quite incredible, because it was the first time that I'd seen a front-bench politician feet to fire, even if it was only half an hour.
Oh, he did Nadine Dorries as well. If you didn't see it all, get it. It's on
I'm just saying
YouTube.
That's what I think the public want to see of us doing for Boris Johnson.
Stay exactly where you are, which you've kindly agreed to do for the next 2 hours, because you're going to be very interested in the next story. The online safety bill has begun its second reading in the House of Commons. Opponents have dubbed it the online censorship bill. But Nadine Dorries, who I said also spoke to Dan Wootton on GB News last night, the Culture Secretary, argues that we must do more in the digital age to protect children online. Dorries has also said that the government wants to regulate so-called Twitter pile-ons in a push to make sure that the UK is the safest place in the world to be online. In practice, the bill will force social media companies to remove so-called legal but harmful content. Big judgments for them to make, take it away from being online. The question is, do you trust the politicians and indeed the big tech bosses in California to define the content that they want labelled harmful and deleted? I said that was my introduction. I'm going to have another interview a bit later on about it. But you've been engaged as a member of the House of Lords in this debate, but you've also been campaigning on it because to you, a little bit like what we were talking earlier on, this is about profound issues of freedom.
Absolutely, but also I do get annoyed when Nadine Dorries says this is all about protecting children, because if the government had brought forward a proportionate, targeted bill that was about protecting children from online harms, and we know things like suicide sites, in terms of access to hardcore porn or any of these vile things that you couldn't have access to, then we'd all say this is a proportionate, targeted, well-thought-through piece of legislation, and even a free speecher like me would be hard-pressed to argue against it.
So it's bad legislative drafting by ministers, but also, deep down, you don't trust Facebook and Twitter.
It's a Trojan horse. And also the government say this is about controlling big tech so that they don't let all these egregious things be seen online, and yet they're empowering them because they're actually asking them to be enforcers.
But I think it's a little bit like the flip side of the coin that we were talking about earlier on about Boris Johnson and Partygate. I suspect the vast majority of people listening to this conversation and even reading about any of this stuff, if they bother to, would say the safety of my child from grooming, sexual abuse, seeing pornography, all the rest of it, takes precedence over anything that Claire Fox is worried about in the freedom of speech box.
And I completely understand that, but it's not their children that this bill will actually affect the free speech of, or anything else. It's their free speech. And it's up to journalists, it's up to people like me. I do this inside the Lords and I put all my speeches up, is to say, you know, Nadine Dorries says this bill's here? Well, listen, there's pages and pages and thousands of words, and this is what it says on page 10.
Final one, and quickly. I said about the second reading, committee stage is vital in both your House and the House of Commons. Can you get what you want? Is this amendable?
It's amendable, but they've been very reluctant to amend it. In fact, the one thing they've said is that they're going to put in a clause defending free speech, but because they've retained harmful, but legal but harmful, is very dangerous. It will rush through the Commons. It'll spend ages in the House of Lords, and it shouldn't be the House of Lords that's undemocratic stopping it. But I do hope that we can make it not as censorious as it is.
Let's keep in touch over that one, because I know it matters to you passionately, and it does indeed to me and many of our viewers. You're with Alistair Stewart here on GB News, on TV, online and digital radio. Coming up, who came out on top in last night's French presidential television debate? But first, a quick break.
Tonight on GB News, at 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 4:25. You're with Alistair Stewart here on GB News TV and radio. Just before that break, we were talking about the debate that's still going on in the House of Commons about whether or not the Prime Minister should be referred to a Privileges Committee hearing. Cliff emails me, I used to like and respect Steve Baker, but I now think he's a complete snake in the grass and should jump ship over to Labour. Just to let you know, Cliff, I still like and respect Steve Baker, and I think he's free to make his own judgments. Then we'll decide later on how it plays out. Stuart, on the other hand, sends an email. For goodness sakes, give Boris a break. Mr. Putin must be loving this example of how our libertarian culture can backfire on us. Zelensky, on the other hand, is probably wondering if he's putting his faith in a lame duck prime minister. Whose side are we really on? Hopefully Zelensky's. Now, in France, President Emmanuel Macron and his only opponent in the final vote, Marine Le Pen, faced off against each other last night in their only pre-election debate. Monsieur Macron accused Madame Le Pen of a desire to pull France out of the European Union and attacked her for taking money from Russian banks. Ms. Le Pen responded defending her stance on religion and banning headscarves in public, whilst pledging to improve the French people's finances. So those were some of the arguments, but who came out on top and how close are those polls really? I am absolutely delighted now to be joined by the top broadcaster in France, in my humble opinion, and former editor-in-chief of L'Express. There she is, Christine Ocran. Christine, thank you so much for fitting us in to be what must be a crazy day. This seemed to me to hinge on Le Pen's relationship with Russia and its banks and her competence. But did she fare better than you suspected or anticipated?
Well, so Alistair, yes, she did fare better, and that was in fact her main challenge. Not to really tumble down. She did 5 years ago. So she was obviously better prepared, more self-assured, and Emmanuel Macron was, of course, very careful to look and sound less arrogant than he's prone to be. The problem with Le Pen is that the moment she will drop, her empathic, I'm close to the people, I know what their daily lives are all about. Once she would leave that kind of repertoire, she got lost. And of course, Emmanuel Macron was able to attack her on the most successful aspect of her campaign, which was about purchasing power and, people's daily lives.
Well, her tax policy is going down very well indeed. But I thought, and we're looking for people who are listening to this on radio rather than watching us on television, a very animated Macron, very full of confidence, and Le Pen slightly way back. He was brutal on the fact that she simply got rules, regulations, laws and statistics wrong. She's an amateur.
Well, he obviously made a lot of efforts not to sound and look that brutal, but his body language, of course, testified to the contrary. And the problem is that she said, a lot of very inaccurate, if not totally shallow arguments. And therefore, I think she pretty much lost the battle.
Yeah. Talking of losing things, Christine, do you also think, as I did, sitting there listening to it and then reading translations of the bits I didn't understand, that she risked losing parts of her core vote by playing down the racism aspects of the old pitch and playing down her loathing of the European Union? Either that's not credible, or if it is credible, an awful lot of Le Pen supporters can say, well, she's not our person anymore.
Well, that's the whole challenge of the second round, is that she has to convince people, more on the left than her own core family. And therefore, and that's true for Macron as well, by the way.
Yeah.
They are both chasing people who voted for Mélenchon, who is the sort of far left guy who came third on the 10th of April. And so Le Pen was very uncomfortable, because the more she would press on immigration, the more people more on the left would disclaim her. Macron was not as firm on European issues as he usually is, for precisely the same reasons.
Yeah, sure.
He knows that people on the left are a bit less enthusiastic than he is and his core supporters about more EU integration.
That rings so many bells from having reported on the earlier Brexit debates back in the days of our mutual friend, people like Tony Benn and what have you, that issue towards immigration and about what the European Union actually exists for. But on Brexit, she's beginning to sound a little bit, to me, like David Cameron 5-6 years ago. If we can reform the European Union, then we should stay in. David found that you can't reform it, and Monsieur Macron and Chancellor Scholz are the two guardian angels of the existing structures, rules and regulations in Brussels.
Not only the French president and the German chancellor, but most of EU leaders right now. It's very striking that in Le Monde, the afternoon newspaper here, which is still the most authoritative newspaper, you have a paper signed by, among others, the Spanish Prime Minister, saying we need a democratic candidate, i.e. Macron, to be elected next Sunday. And it is very interesting that Le Pen has decided not to talk about Brexit anymore, not to talk about getting out of the euro. She actually said, I don't want to leave the EU. She pretty much talks like her Hungarian friend, Mr. Orban, about being, the real European.
Final question. You and I have been around for too long to admit to, but do you believe what was a great television moment will have shifted the polls, Christine?
No. In our political history, whatever the talent of the contenders, the TV debate is very much part of our traditions, but it hardly moves the votes. So we'll see on Sunday. President Macron, in my view, will win.
Christine Ocran, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for fitting us in. The great Christine Ocran there, former editor-in-chief of L'Express and really one of the towering giants of French journalism. That cheeky question I put to her about Cameron's view, and you and I have talked about this before, that Cameron genuinely tried to get a better deal on open borders and repatriation of laws and was just sent running.
Well, I mean, in view of the fact that all of the sounds coming out of the EU are towards a more federalist EU, the idea that you're going to be able to retain much sovereignty within that greater federalism is for the birds.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't mean that people are queuing to leave either. I don't want to be silly about
Wasn't
it.
it fascinating to hear Christine Ocran remind us that they're all in it together, the French Prime Minister and across the EU, they're coming out and saying vote Macron.
Yeah.
Almost outrageous.
But one of the things that's really striking is that that's the point, is Macron is part of a globalist club.
Yeah.
They feel comfortable with each other.
Totally.
He's the same.
Claire Fox, got to stop it there. Tons more to come in the next hour and a half, but we have to take a quick break now. Stay with us, Alistair Stewart, Claire Fox and the rest of us here on GB News.
Good afternoon. The latest news headlines this hour. As far as Partygate is concerned, we can tell you the Met Police says there will be no further updates on Partygate fines until after May's local elections. The force says investigations into Downing Street and Whitehall parties will continue during the pre-election period, but no new statements will be issued. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson says he's absolutely nothing to hide as MPs debate whether to launch an investigation into claims he misled Parliament about lockdown breaches at Downing Street. That comes after the government withdrew its request to delay the motion. Conservative MPs now have a free vote this afternoon. And on a key day in the Commons, Boris Johnson is in India. He's there on a trade visit to strengthen ties with the country. The Prime Minister says he hopes a free trade agreement can be reached as soon as this autumn. He's going to hold talks with his counterpart, Narendra Modi, tomorrow. News here at home, and a man has been found guilty of murder more than 27 years after strangling 6-year-old Ricky Neve. James Watson was 13 at the time of the schoolboy's death in Peterborough in 1994. Ricky's mother was originally accused of being involved in the killing. She has today called Watson a monster. The 41-year-old will be sentenced next month. And a mother, stepfather and a 14-year-old boy have been found guilty of murdering 5-year-old Logan Mwangi. The child's body was found dumped in the River Ogmore in Bridgend last July. John Cole, Angarad Williamson and the teenager were convicted at Cardiff Crown Court. And President Biden says there's no evidence Mariupol in Ukraine has completely fallen, despite Russia claiming victory in the port city. Hundreds of defenders are still holed up in the steelworks there. President Putin has called off an attack on the plant and instead ordered for it to be blockaded. Those are your latest news headlines on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You were GB News, and Al Stewart is back after the break.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's just coming up to 20 to 5 and you're with Alastair Stewart here on GB News, TV, online and on digital radio. As Tom Harwood predicted, MPs have indeed just voted to approve Labour's motion that the Prime Minister should indeed be referred to a hearing of the Privileges Committee over whether or not he misled the House of Commons over the issue of parties at number 10 being in breach of COVID rules. We're just trying to get hold of Tom at the moment, which we will do just in case there were any twists or turns at the end that we want to keep you up to date with here on GB News. But in the meantime, that's the headline. They have passed it, as Tom did predict about half an hour ago. Now, meantime, away from all of that, Boris Johnson has announced a set of investments and export deals with India as he makes a two-day trip to that country. He's due to discuss trade and security ties with his counterpart, Narendra Modi, in India's capital, New Delhi, tomorrow. But difficult conversations on the invasion of Ukraine are also to be expected, given India's strong ties with Russia and refusal at the United Nations, not once but twice, to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The country hasn't criticised Russia at all directly since it invaded and didn't want to join that condemnation, as I say, at 2 United Nations votes on the issue. Joining me now is the Chief Operating Officer of Conservative Friends of the Commonwealth, Sunil Sharma. First things first, just to give it some context, Sunil, when his future's on the line at home, this is a big deal for the Prime Minister to have gone ahead with this trip. There was even rumours 48 hours ago that he might abandon it because he was so nervous about today's vote.
Good afternoon. Yeah, for sure. I think it's a strong move from him to visit India. I think it's an important move. I think for a long time, the relationship between the West and India has been very complicated. And I think at many points, it seemed as if the West and the UK, we tend to prefer a relationship with Pakistan and China. So I think, if anything, this signifies with everything that's going on at home, with all the sort of anarchy and uncertainty, I think, if anything, this will help solidify that relationship with Britain and India, just to show how serious he is about developing a stronger relationship with India, because it is a complex relationship.
Totally complex. And for those people who are listening to our conversation on radio, we just ran some pictures of Boris Johnson at Gandhi's famous wheel and then signing various documents. I mean, there is the backdrop to it all is still very much a post-colonial relationship where there are arguments about whether we should be sending aid to a country that has its own space program and the rest of it. But can I put it to you, given what you just said a moment ago, that this is much more about trying to get India on side over Ukraine and Russia? That is the Prime Minister's absolute priority at the moment.
I think that's an important part of it, for sure.
They're doing the most important part of it.
I think so. I think what you have to remember with India in terms of Russia, Soviet Union, historically, that has been the strongest ally. You look at the military in India right now, the majority comes still from Russia and historically Soviet Union. So I think the important part of it is developing that trust, that relationship between the two countries, which these two have accumulated over the last few years. It's worth noting this is probably the best relationship India and UK has had, maybe since India's been independent. So I think it's very good that we have that. And I think it's good that they were going to address Ukraine and Russia. And I think it's good that the UK has not necessarily straight away condemned Modi for not criticizing Russia, because there is a practical element. And generally we have, as Britain, been a fairly unreliable partner with regards to India. We've often sided with Pakistan, China during their sort of conflict. So I think it's a strong positive move. I think on India's side, they're probably looking for reassurances that this is a long-term project, this is a long-term plan, that you're going to be a trustworthy ally, because historically, and we've seen Brits generally, we have sided with Pakistan and China. And I think with what's happened with COVID, with what's happened in the last 5-6 years with our deteriorating relationship with China, I think India will probably want to see that they're almost not the alternative, but they have been positioning themselves recently as the alternative to China in many ways. But I think
that trade deal could expand in the interest of both sides. The better gets the position on Ukraine and Russia for India. But we've covered that. I don't want to repeat it. In terms of the trade deal, we shouldn't forget the fact that Tata is one of the biggest employers and runs a couple of businesses like Jaguar Land Rover and even Tetley Tea that are doing extremely well. This trade deal is about us sending exports post-Brexit and more of it to India and buying in raw materials from India and finished products. It's also about visas and work permits, isn't it?
I think it is. I think it's a mixture of all of those things. And I think for a long time, regardless of European Union, whatever, it's something that we haven't really explored enough, both trade and immigration with India. That doesn't necessarily mean we open up our borders completely, but there's no reason why there's some of the best universities are in India now. There's no reason why we can't take some of the brightest and best students from India. There's no reason why they can't take some from our country. So I think there is a much bigger play as aside from just trade. These are two democratic countries. India is the largest democracy. I think it makes sense for us to have a stronger relationship, both on trade, immigration, going forward, human rights, going forward. We've got conflict we're seeing with Russia. We've got uncertainty with China. The world's a very complex place. It makes sense to have a country that has shared history, shared values, shared democratic beliefs, that we should be closer. And I think it's something that's been almost a wasted potential for the last 20, 30 years between these two countries. So It's good to see Narendra Modi and Boris both taking that initiative and trying to bring this together.
Sunil Sharma, Chief Operating Officer of the Conservative Friends of Commonwealth, thank you very much indeed. Listening to that and to all of my conversations throughout this afternoon, I'm delighted to say, as my friend Claire Fox, I thought he was brilliant, because it really is about a period of half a century of unfinished business between two great countries that once had an abhorrent relationship.
It's very important that the UK doesn't adopt the tone of telling India what to do. There might be some disapproval of the way that India is handling the Ukraine situation. But, in the COP26 discussions, I always felt very anxious when you get a kind of UK wagging its finger and saying, oh, well, we did all that development stuff, you shouldn't do it, don't use fossil fuels and so on. If you take India seriously as a massive democratic country that stands on its own 2 feet, then you have to respect things that you wouldn't agree with.
Even if it means that they are closer to Russia than we would like them to be. You have to buy into that.
You haven't got any choice. I mean, you can say, we don't think you should do that, but there can be a neutrality. I think it was rightly pointed out that, although I want everybody to condemn Russia, the world is being split along certain lines. And the truth of the matter is that India has to be sure that the West are not going to treat it as a potential Russia in the future. You can't just kind of go around saying, do as we tell you, because of that post-colonial position.
Really important and interesting stuff, Claire. Thanks very much indeed. Stay exactly where you are. Delighted to say I can now go back to that breaking story that I told you shortly before we began the conversation about India, and that is to confirm for you that MPs have voted in the last few minutes without any opposition from the government Conservative benches to open an investigation into the Prime Minister, as Labour outlined in their motion. There were no cries of no from the government benches. Those in favour, those against, nobody said no. So no formal 15-minute division on the matter either. Following that vote, the House of Commons adjourned debate for the day and wrapped things up. And we've asked Tom to sniff around a little bit and see if he can catch any folk who would like to explain themselves as to why they did that and how it turned out in the end. And if he is successful and gets someone that we think you would find fascinating and interesting, we will bring them and Tom to you a little bit later on. Now, here's a story that you may well not have heard much about, as I said at my opening comments at the top of the hour. Riots broke out across Sweden last week and continued until Monday over the public burning of the Quran. According to officials, 26 police officers and 14 others were wounded as a result of that criminality. 20 police vehicles were also destroyed or damaged, and a school in Malmö was set on fire. Rioting then followed. Joining me to discuss that is Communications Director at the Henry Jackson Society, Sam Armstrong. As I said slightly tongue-in-cheek, but it's true. This is very little written about. Is it the rioting that dare not speak its name?
Well, look, it's certainly a very uncomfortable topic. We don't like talking about this very much in the same way as we don't like talking about the fact that there is a school teacher in this country at Batley Grammar School that we were all talking about a year ago, who still can't go back to his school because we have allowed the kind of shadow banning of blasphemy back into this country. Now, there are riots in Sweden. They are serious. They involve the wanton destruction of property, damage to and harm to individuals. There's a very real chance that someone could get killed. And it seems to me extraordinary when you compare the reaction in this country, in terms of the level of reportage given over to the Black Lives Matter protest, a serious protest that descended into rioting, compared to this. Different motive, similar levels of violence in a different country, very different reaction.
Let's be crystal clear on this as well, though, that Mr. Paladin, who is the guy driving all of this, and his political party, which is called Hardline, I mean, he basically is touring the country, burning copies of the Quran and calling for Islam to be banned across Sweden. I mean, I have to put it to you that crosses pretty well every line that most ordinary law-abiding people respect.
Look, let me put it very simply. Mr. Paludan is a deeply reprehensible cretin. He is. I don't like him, wouldn't like to have a cup of tea with him, certainly wouldn't let him anywhere near myself or anybody I cared about. Nevertheless, he has not committed a crime. In fact, he pretty much cancelled the main Quran burning protest. But let's just put it in these terms. Had he burnt the Bible, as many people do, it's a book that means an awful lot to an awful lot of people, including myself. Had he burnt it, nobody would have protested, nobody would have rioted, nobody would have been burned down, nobody's lives would have been put in jeopardy. But there is one particular religion which, for whatever reason, is afforded a particular level of protection. And in my view, it's because there is almost this tacit acceptance of the fact that should it be criticised, should it be blasphemed, that a kind of soft terrorism almost is condoned. And in my view, burning down police cars in protest at something like this, and we've seen this a lot over the years in this country and others, because you don't like what somebody else is doing or the fact that it's allowed in society, is a form of soft terrorism. And it's bizarre to me that it's not even really treated as such.
Sam Armstrong, Henry Jackson Society, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Soft terrorism, and it's something that's snuck up upon us without us having had a say on the matter.
It's absolutely outrageous that the media aren't all over this. I mean, all of the media. The fact that it's being ignored in Sweden, violent riots for a whole week, and nobody talks about it. And that tells you a great deal. I think that the reprehensible far-right, racist, let's be honest, anti-Muslim preacher, such as he is, has been going around the place. Mr. Paladin. But the point is, what he says is offensive, but it's what he says. In the end, burning a Quran, beheading a statue of Our Lady, or, these are vile, blasphemous acts. But you can't say, and therefore we can have a riot about it. And these are violent riots that demand that he's not allowed to say things that are offensive.
No, that's why I put the question I did to our friend from Henry Jackson. I mean, it's the ultimate extension of the Voltaire. I disagree fundamentally with what you say, but I defend to the death your right to say it. Yeah. Are there no limits to that?
I don't think there are in terms of what you can say politically, because he hasn't even been inciting. I mean, let's put it this way. The guy represents a very nasty side of Swedish politics, which is racist and anti-Muslim. The problem that we've got is the Islamist extreme response, which does not represent all Muslims, actually is fueling a much nastier atmosphere, which is that basically you are not allowed to say that or it's blasphemy. And I thought pointing out that we have had an aspect of that in this country is true. We know it's not just the teacher in Batley Grammar School, but we know that there's been a reluctance to intervene in certain social circumstances, socially difficult circumstances, for fear of being called Islamophobic and so on. And that is very dangerous for society, far more than Mr. Paladin.
Claire Fox, thank you very much indeed. More of that. It's now 8 minutes to 5. We've bags more. Don't go anywhere. But first, I'm going to bring you up to date with the weather.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest forecast from the Met Office. Sunny spells, particularly in the north over the next 24 hours, the risk of some showers across central and southern areas. Turning quite windy as well, particularly as we move from Friday and into Saturday. The reason for this is low pressures to the south of the UK, high pressure to the north, and we're starting to see a brisk easterly wind develop across the whole of the UK. Through Thursday evening, though, the winds remain fairly light. We'll generally see clearing skies across the whole of the UK, so a dry end to the day. Though it won't be long before some low cloud mist and murk from the North Sea starts to move back further inland, spreading its way slowly westwards. The best of the clear skies will be in the west here, temperatures dipping to mid-single figures, so quite a chilly night to come, but under the cloud holding up 6, 7, 8 degrees. So a mixed start to Friday morning across the whole of the UK, largely dry, some sunshine but low cloud too. An area of cloud will move across southern parts of England and Wales as the day progresses. Some showers developing here too. 1 or 2 of those could be heavy at times, but plenty of sunshine to come across the north of the UK, the Midlands northwards. Here the sunshine will be hazy, but temperatures 16, 17 degrees, though an easterly breeze will keep it cool along the east coast, 11, 12, 13 degrees here. Through the evening time, we'll see showers fade away across the south. It will be a fairly quiet end to the day. But again, we'll see some low cloud mist and murk developing during the early hours, taking us into Saturday morning. Under any clear skies, temperatures once again dipping to mid-single figures. So generally staying frost-free, largely due to that brisk wind continuing. So windy start to Saturday morning, some sunshine, but also a lot of cloud. The cloud thick enough perhaps for the odd light shower across the Midlands, Wales, Northern England as we go through the day. Best of the sunshine across Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, mid-teens again. Looking ahead over the next few days, a lot of clouds still feeding in from the east, but temperatures respectable.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome up. Coming up to the top of the hour, you're with Alistair Stewart here on GB News, TV, online and radio. Coming up, Ukrainians are trapped in the besieged city of Mariupol with a commander warning that his forces could survive just days or even hours. I am delighted now to welcome General Sir Richard Barrons to the programme to discuss that. Richard, first of all, on Mariupol, any way out for the civilians hinges now on a swap with Russian prisoners. Is that the only way out for them?
Well, I think we're in situations where Mariupol is essentially taken by the Russians, less for the remaining defenders around the steelworks and the civilian population that are in the city and still trapped. So there is nothing that's going to happen without the consent of the Russians to a humanitarian evacuation or the end of the siege of the steelworks.
Something deeply significant happened in the last 24 hours, and you are a much bigger expert upon it than I will ever be. In geopolitical terms, how significant was that test launch of the Satan II Icbm missile?
So it was symbolically significant, but not a surprise to anybody. The US and others know this system exists. It's a super heavy intercontinental ballistic missile, so it's irrelevant to the war in Ukraine. It was messaging to the West that Russia remains a major nuclear power and will often raise the prospect of nuclear weapons whenever it feels threatened. But it was probably timed to coincide with the fall of Mariupol and the approach of the Russian Orthodox Easter celebrations in a package of news that was meant to play well to a Russian domestic audience.
Which Putin is desperately in need of. It takes us back then to the pre-Gorbachev, Reagan in Iceland era, because Washington was tipped off that this was going to happen. But just a little reminder that an intercontinental ballistic missile with all of those independently targeted warheads can cross the Pacific or the Atlantic and rain hell upon the United States of America.
Yes, that's absolutely right, or indeed Europe or anywhere else on the planet. So it represents another step in nuclear deterrence, and we should recognise that there are many other countries in the world that have nuclear weapons that are not party to the Cold War nuclear arms control arrangement. So nuclear proliferation is just a part of the modern world.
Totally. Final question then, Richard, which I always ask you when you're kind enough to come on GB News, and I think you half answered it earlier. Are you still confident that however ghastly what is happening on the ground in Ukraine is containable to there?
Yes, it is right now. There is absolutely nothing in the war in Ukraine at the minute that would warrant a spillover to a war between Russia and NATO. And the only way that would change would be if President Putin, for whatever reason, felt that he personally or his regime was threatened, and that's clearly not the case now.
Aaron's always a pleasure to talk to you, sir. Thank you for finding time for us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And the time is exactly 6 seconds past 5. I was hoping to be able to say 5 o'clock there, but my courtesies in bidding farewell to Richard come first. You're watching Alistair Stewart here on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. As I say, it is the top of the hour. Welcome back, if you've been good enough to be with us since 4 o'clock. To Brazier, I am Alistair Stewart, not Colin Brazier, as I hope is immediately evident, but I'm delighted and honoured to be sitting in for Colin today. Coming up live at 5, it is, of course, Her Majesty the Queen's birthday. Palace has published images of the Queen with 2 utterly stunning fell ponies. We'll be discussing the Queen's love for all equestrianism as she turns 96. And we'll be bringing you more on those French elections coming up on Sunday. Last night was the only televised debate, but did Le Pen or Macron come out on top? And could France really leave the European Union? We'll have more from Westminster on our top story, and that is Steve Baker there. You can see him if you're watching us on television. I'm describing it for you if you're listening on radio. Steve Baker, the arch-Brexiteer and the man who toppled Theresa May, has now turned on Boris Johnson and has called for him to go. Is the Prime Minister genuinely facing renewed and serious challenges? He says the gig's up. Joining me for the rest of the programme as well, I'm delighted to say, is Claire Fox, a good friend of mine. She's been here since we kicked off, and I'll be asking her views on all manner of things as the last hour unfolds. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news headlines today. Here's Polly.
Good afternoon, 2 minutes after 5 o'clock. I'm Polly Middlehurst with your latest news headlines. And as you've been hearing, Boris Johnson is to face a parliamentary investigation into whether he misled Parliament over parties that were held at Downing Street during lockdown in 2020. In the last hour, a Labour motion passed without a vote after there were no objections. The Prime Minister will now face a contempt probe by the Privileges Committee once police complete their investigation into COVID rule breaches. Well, the Prime Minister himself, who's in India, insists he has absolutely nothing to hide. Boris Johnson is on a trade visit to try to strengthen ties with India. Meanwhile, the Met Police say there'll be no further updates on Partygate fines until after May's local elections. The force says investigations into Downing Street and Whitehall parties will continue during pre-election period, but no new statements are going to be issued. In other news today, President Biden says there's no evidence that Mariupol in Ukraine has completely fallen, despite Russia claiming victory in the southern port city. President Putin called off an attack on a steel plant where hundreds of troops and civilians are sheltering, ordering it to be blockaded instead. The US is now sending more weapons to support Ukraine, announcing a £612 million security package for the country. He's also banning Russian-affiliated ships from US borders.
Now they've launched and refocused their campaign to seize new territory in eastern Ukraine. And we're in a critical window now of time where they're going to set the stage for the next phase of this war. And the United States and our allies and partners are moving as fast as possible to continue to provide Ukraine the forces that they need, the weapons they need, the equipment they need. Their forces need to defend their nation.
Here in the UK, a mother, stepfather and a 14-year-old boy have been found guilty of murdering 5-year-old Logan Mwangi. The child's body was dumped in the River Ogmore last July in Bridgend. John Cole and Garrad Williamson and the teenager were convicted at Cardiff Crown Court after 5 hours of deliberation by the jury. And a man has been found guilty of murder more than 27 years after strangling 6-year-old Ricky Neve. James Watson was 13 at the time of the schoolboy's death in Peterborough in 1994. Ricky's mother was originally accused by police of being involved in the killing. She has today called Watson a monster. The 41-year-old will be sentenced next month. And the Children's Commissioner says smacking should be banned in England. Dame Rachel de Souza wants the law changed to ensure children and adults share the same protection from assault. The Education Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi, disagrees, though, and says parents are entitled to discipline their kids. The change would bring the law in line with Scotland and Wales. Northern Ireland is also yet to ban smacking. Chair of the Education Select Committee, Robert Halfon, told GBNews it's a topic that must be debated properly.
A child puts his hand on a fire and you automatically smack that child's arm even lightly, would that come under a ban? So this is not an easy issue to pass legislation on. But as I say, if I'm not allowed to smack adults or animals, why should we then say, well, it's okay to smack defenceless children?
Sir Lewis Hamilton and Serena Williams have joined Sir Martin Broughton's bid to buy Chelsea Football Club. The 7-time Formula One world champion and former tennis world #1 are part of a consortium of high-profile investors looking to buy the Premier League club. Sir Martin, the former Liverpool FC chairman, has been on the shortlist to buy the club since Roman Abramovich put it up for sale after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And to mark the Queen's 96th birthday today, a 41-gun salute in Hyde Park in London to honour the occasion. Well, Her Majesty not in the capital today, choosing instead to spend the day at Sandringham in Norfolk, so perhaps not hearing that while she spent time in a cottage loved by her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh. But a new photograph has been released to celebrate the Queen's birthday today. Taken last month in the grounds of Windsor Castle, Her Majesty is pictured with 2 of her white fell ponies. You're with GB News, more news as it happens. Now let's get back to Al Stewart, who's sitting in for Brazier.
Polly, thank you very much indeed. You are on fire. Dee emails me about Steve Baker. What a vile, backstabbing man. Get him out. Sue, these politicians disgust me. What happened to innocent until proved guilty? I've seen no evidence so far of any party. Everything that they're saying in these speeches is speculation. How can any committee prove that the PM is not convinced that he was within the COVID rules? And finally, an email from Karen. Partygate's just ridiculous nonsense. Cost of living, Ukraine and crime, along with many other topics, are far more important. Well, it is all about our top story, but first, those emails, I think, reflect what many of you are feeling. I've got pages of it, but we need to move on to bring you right up to date with the facts as well. And do keep the emails and tweets coming in, though. MPs have indeed voted in the last few minutes without any opposition from the government benches to open that investigation into the Prime Minister's behaviour. A committee will now produce a report stating whether or not they believe that Boris Johnson deliberately misled Parliament. Ahead of the vote, leading Tory Brexiteer Steve Baker, who just 2 days ago seemed to forgive the Prime Minister and indeed suggest that it was now time to move on, dramatically changed tack. He said that after breaking the, quotes, letter and spirit of the lockdown rules, the Prime Minister now should be long gone. He said the gig is up. Here is how he concluded that speech.
I have now got, having watched what I would say is contrition, beautiful, marvellous contrition, isn't my sense of it, is it rather in a sense only lasted as long as it took to get out of the headmaster's study. And that's not good enough for me, and it's not good enough for my voters. I'm sorry, it's not. And I'm afraid I'm now in a position where I have to acknowledge that if the Prime Minister occupied any other office of senior responsibility, if he was a Secretary of State, if he was a Minister of State, a Parliamentary Undersecretary, a Permanent Secretary, a Director General, if he was a Chief Executive of a private company or a Board Director, he would be long gone. The reason that he is not long gone is because removing a sitting Prime Minister is an extremely grave matter, and goodness knows people will know I've had something to do with that too. It's an extremely grave matter, an extremely big decision, and it tends to untether history, and all of us should approach such things with reverence and awe and an awareness of the difficulty of doing it and the potential consequences, and that's why I've been tempted to forgive. But I have to say now, the possibility of that really, for me, has gone. I have to say I'm sorry that for not obeying the letter and the spirit, and I think we have heard that the Prime Minister did know what the letter was, the Prime Minister now should be long gone. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll certainly vote for this motion, but really, the Prime Minister should just know the gig's up.
Steve Baker there speaking about 2 or 3 hours ago. Tom McCafferty was with us earlier on, and I'm delighted to say that I'm now joined by our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who is live there for us in Westminster. So the government withdrew their amendment because they knew they couldn't get it through, and in the end it went through nem-con. Nobody even bothered to say no. It was a walkover for Keir Starmer and the Labour Party.
Yeah, indeed. On the nod is the technical term they used here in Parliament. Alistair, you're right, with no opposition essentially from the government, having to U-turn pretty spectacularly earlier on today when they worked out simply they didn't have the numbers. Last night we were told there was going to be a 3-line whip against this motion, but it was pretty clear this morning that so many Tory MPs were likely to abstain, quite a few of them also down with COVID or out of the country, that the government would lose. So that's why there was a free vote, but in the end they decided that a vote wasn't needed. The Prime Minister now will be referred to the Privileges Committee, a cross-party group of MPs who will carry out an investigation into whether he misled Parliament, effectively whether he lied to MPs or not about Partygate. We're not expecting them to conclude any time soon, though, and certainly not before the Met Police's investigation into all of this. They are still investigating further possible breaches of the COVID restrictions, though they are not going to provide us any more updates until after the local elections, until after May 5th. So a bit of breathing room for the government there. But it's been a pretty tricky, I would say pretty terrible day all round, again, for Boris Johnson today. Losing this motion, a real sense that many of his MPs simply were not prepared to go that far to protect Boris Johnson, that they believe that this due process should continue or should go ahead. And couple that, as you say, with Steve Baker, who we've just listened to, now calling for the Prime Minister to resign, and William Ragg, another Conservative MP, perhaps less surprisingly, but revealing that he has handed in his letter to the 1922 committee. And all this, of course, while Boris Johnson himself is not even here. He's in India on a trade trip, insisting that he has got nothing to hide. And while he's disappointed by Steve Baker's decision, he wants to get on and focus on what he says are much bigger issues, such as the cost of living crisis and Ukraine.
As indeed do our viewers and listeners from, I know it's not scientific at all, but people who are good enough to send in emails. Final quick one, and I take a deep breath before saying it. There's the sort of sense of stunt politics to all of this, in my mind. As you just said, this committee is not even going to meet until way into the medium future, and nobody knows what the outcome of it will be, but today's a Pyrrhic victory.
Yeah, I think this could be quite difficult. I mean, it's a cross-party group of MPs. I mean, how are they going to prove the Prime Minister misled Parliament? I mean, it's quite difficult to prove that someone intentionally misled, essentially lied. That's quite difficult to prove of anyone, let alone, I think, the Prime Minister in these circumstances. So I think it's going to be a very, very difficult process for the committee itself. But Alistair, all I would say is, you know, what we've seen again today is just this process, this story, just again being dragged out more and more, quite successfully, must be said, by the opposition. The Met have added to that today by saying they're not going to do anything or reveal anything for another couple of weeks. And frankly, that is the last thing the Prime Minister wants or needs, that this story, this scandal, effectively, is not going away. And as I say, for Boris Johnson, that's not great, because many of his MPs are frankly exhausted to the point where they may start to think and question that the only way for this story to go away is if the Prime Minister goes away.
Indeed. The gig's up, as Steve Baker said. Darren, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. Claire Fox is still with me and has been since 4 o'clock. Am I pushing my luck saying it's stunt politics?
No, because I feel as though what's happened here is it's an attempt to drag this out for a long, long time so that the opposition can constantly keep chipping away. Now, the danger...
Oddly, though, just about in effect, that's what the government amendment that was then withdrawn said, is let's wait until the police have finished and Sue Gray's published...
They're cowardly trying to kick it down the road. The opposition want to say it goes to a committee, there's now going to be an investigation, it drags on and on and on. The danger we've got here, as I think that GBNews viewers are indicating, is that rather than people thinking, I'm so fed up of this, I want the Prime Minister to go, they think, I'm so fed up of this, I can't stand the Westminster bubble. So they become cynical about politics in general. You know, and, you know, we've heard people saying, don't trust Steve Baker. Now, no disrespect to our great viewers here on GBNews, but they're not the whole country. But I've actually found that even people who are very critical of Boris Johnson are becoming cynical about the way this is being used to undermine the democratic process. And I think that where politics has gone wrong over the years is to say that the voters shouldn't be allowed to make decisions like who's the Prime Minister. It should be left up to committees and Westminster and all the rest of it. And now they're basically being told, you've got nothing to do with this. We're deciding who's honourable and so on. And this is not, I want to emphasise, not because I'm sympathetic to Boris Johnson. No. It's looking at it, trying to look at it objectively and seeing that I think that there's more damage being done by going on about Partygate to the good of politics.
I don't include Steve Baker in this by any means, but are there those within this debate who are still in the public mass media, newspapers, television, still punishing Boris Johnson for Brexit?
Undoubtedly, there's a huge element of we're getting him back from Brexit.
I get that a lot in my emails and
It's
tweets.
also true, by the way, that people like Steve Baker and other people can't forgive the Tory, their own government, for lockdown. That they feel that all that civil liberties suspended, the really draconian OTT treatment of people during lockdown has never been punished. But that's why I was saying to you, let's talk about that then. It just seems to me that Partygate almost trivialises what I want Boris Johnson to be held to account for. Yeah. And I think I just can tell that there's a souring mood in the electorate. That's my view. that just thinks, what are they going on about this for?
And the worst thing that can happen in a pluralist democracy that allows everybody to have their say within the law is when people get bored with it.
Exactly.
That way lies disaster. Yeah. Claire, thanks very much indeed. Stay exactly where you are. Still much more to come that you may well want to comment upon, and I look forward to hearing it. Now, we said right at the very top, and indeed Polly had some lovely pictures about it in her news bulletin, Her Majesty the Queen is celebrating her 96th birthday in Sandringham. Britain's longest reigning monarch travelled by helicopter to her Norfolk estate, where she's being joined by family and friends. She's thought to be staying in a cottage, particularly liked by her late husband, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. The photograph that Polly had in her bulletin, there it is again, is so lovely that you cannot see it too many times. It's been released to mark the birthday, and it shows Her Majesty the Queen with two great big ponies, but ponies they are. They're called fell ponies, reflecting her lifelong interest in, and, I might add, knowledge of all matters equestrian. Joining me now is the editor-in-chief of Majesty magazine, Ingrid Seward. Ingrid, it is always a pleasure to talk to you. Let me start with that point, because we both know it because we've talked about it so much, but she chose that setting and she chose those beautiful fell ponies absolutely consciously. It says all you need to know on her birthday about Her Majesty the Queen.
It certainly does. And every year, apart from when COVID was around, the Queen used to go to Wood Farm with Prince Philip on her birthday, because that is the time of year, as you well know, Alistair, when her horses are giving birth. And there's nothing she enjoys more in the world than seeing her little foals. Yeah. These are racehorse foals. And I think that it gives her huge pleasure, and that's where she is at the moment.
She will, the other side of that coin, and I don't want to just be all candy floss about it, although I do feel very candy floss about the horses, particularly, as you well know. But other things that have happened in the last few months have genuinely saddened her. Giving Monday money out to folk who need it and deserve it is not only a royal duty, it is something that over the years, many years, has given her genuine pleasure, and she will have been genuinely sad not to have been able to do it this year.
I think there's a lot of things that have saddened her that she's unable to do. And I think that she, when her mind is so sharp and, she knows exactly what's going on, but when her body won't obey her commands, she finds it very difficult to move in comfortably at all. And it must be so frustrating to her. And of course, she's going to do her best to be at the Jubilee, especially, for instance, the Derby, where I gather there's going to be 40 of her former jockeys and current jockeys sort of giving a guard of honour for her, dressed in the Queen's racing silks. I mean, little touches like that, she would be very, very sad to miss. So I think what she's doing is trying to build up her strength to get through at least bits of the Jubilee.
Final question, Ingrid, and it's slightly cheeky. She adores Harry. I know that. You know that better than I. But do you think deep down she might just wish that he didn't give quite so many television interviews to quite so many broadcasters?
I'm absolutely certain she wishes that. And she will. She obviously is very, very fond of Harry, but whether or not he's her favourite grandson or not, I don't know. Harry is very keen for us all to know how much the Queen loves him. And I think the Queen is so canny. I think she knows and probably knows exactly what Harry's going to do. And she knows he's going to say something controversial because it deflects attention back onto him. And I have my suspicions about whether he and Meghan will actually come to the Jubilee at all.
Yeah, well, maybe they'll suddenly develop a bit of judgment in the matter. Ingrid, it is genuinely always a pleasure to see you, and thank you very much indeed for joining me yet again here on GB News. Lovely to see you, and thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Ingrid Seward, the editor of Majesty magazine, who is one of those royal commentators who genuinely knows what's going on. Do you wish that Harry would shut up?
Oh, I think so. I am not particularly interested in the royal family.
Oh, you're a Republican.
I'm much more sympathetic as
a noble Republican, as I said about democracy earlier. I respect all views.
I've got no problem with it, but what I was going to say was I I don't like the fact that the cynicism about the royal family has been dragged to the forefront, not by political republicanism, but by a shoddy celebrity show that's been going on at the same time. So it's fine
This is
to
the
say-
Netflix documentary.
Exactly.
5 cameras everywhere the two of them
and
go.
Narcissism, and also we have to say the whole Andrew saga. So what I'm saying is the royal family, where it is being sullied, is not in the sense that people are saying politically we shouldn't be subjects, we should be citizens, and there's a problem with the royal family. It's because of the most sordid. And in that sense, anybody would feel sorry for a 96-year-old queen who wouldn't want that on anyone, would
Totally agree.
I feel sorry for her on that.
Ingrid put it perfectly. Just pipe down a bit, sunshine.
Yeah.
That would
And
be
have
very
a happy
helpful for
birthday
everyone.
to an old lady.
Indeed so. That was Claire Fox sharing her views on monarchy and republicanism. Let's bring you right up to date with all of the news headlines. Here's Polly.
Join me, Nana Akweer, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up. I hug everyone. We learn from it and try and move on. That's it. Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GB News on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
5:25. Welcome back. You're with Alastair Stewart on GB News, TV, online and digital radio. We're going to pop back to France now. President Emmanuel Macron and his opponent Marine Le Pen faced each other last night in their only pre-election debate. Monsieur Macron accused Madame Le Pen of a desire to pull France out of the European Union and attacked her for taking money from Russian banks. Madame Le Pen responded, defending her stance on religion and banning headscarves in public while pledging to improve French people's finances. But who came out on top, and how close are the polls now with just a few days to go? I'm delighted to be joined once again by Brit journalist David Chazan, who is based there in Paris. We talked about it, and I think we agreed it was a probably tough old call for Le Pen to get much closer. But how do you objectively feel she did last night?
Well, Alastair, I think the most important thing for her was not to repeat her disastrous performance in a similar debate against Emmanuel Macron 5 years ago, which was widely seen as a big turning point in the campaign and one of the reasons why he beat her by such a comfortable margin. Now, she put in a much better showing this time. She was clearly a lot better prepared. The problem for her was that he simply had a vastly superior grasp of policy, the economy, the facts. He picked holes in her arguments, particularly on the economy. And so since the debate, the polling shows that he's maintained his lead of some 10 to 12 points over her. So she really needed a breakthrough in the debate to help her narrow the gap with him. She failed to achieve it. And polling out this morning shows that or suggests rather, because it's often difficult to tell with these things, but the polling suggests that about 60% of people who watched the debate last night think that Macron came across as more credible, more convincing than Marine Le Pen.
In all of these things, David, there's a real danger about losing core vote, and it applies to elections, whether it's here in the United Kingdom or in La Belle France. The fact that she has sought consciously to water down slightly her anti-Islam, her, some would say, racist stance, and back off a little bit, we will get out of the European Union because it's corrupt, it's bankrupt, and the rest of it, that's going to start damaging her core vote as well. So she may not only not win folk over, she's chucking folk overboard.
Well, I think that's a dilemma for Marine Le Pen. She can't afford to lose her base. On the other hand, if she wants to win a presidential election and appear as somebody fit to govern the country, then she needs to moderate her position, because we all know elections are generally won in the centre ground. And I mean, the keys to the Élysée Palace now are effectively held by the 22% of voters who backed the far-left candidate, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, in the first round. He was just 1 point behind Marine Le Pen, almost qualified to go through to the second round. And so this is really a contest between Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen to see who can pick up more of those far-left voters. Now, Mr. Macron has been talking a lot about the economy, about climate change, and also helping the poor, things that are close to the left-wing supporters' hearts. Marine Le Pen has also been talking a lot about inflation and the cost of living, but French commentators are certainly saying today that it looks like Emmanuel Macron is succeeding more in picking up support from those voters than she is. And today he was out in a gritty Paris suburb that voted very heavily for the far left in the first round. He's been talking about trying to improve housing there, job opportunities and so on. He even took part in a little boxing bout. Boxing's a very popular sport up there. So he's really going all out to capture that segment of the vote. Marine Le Pen was up in northern France today talking to lorry drivers, but it would appear she's less successful at that at the moment.
We shall watch with interest. You've been so helpful, David. Thank you very much indeed. Love to talk to you again as the weekend unfolds and after the vote on Sunday. But for the time being, David Chazan, thank you very much indeed. Your little head was going up and down, that particularly when David was talking about the vital importance of this 22% that voted far left.
It's true, but I think that the story of this election is Macron's failure to wander into being the president again in the arrogant way that he assumed he could.
Because he had novelty value first time.
He's basically, his votes collapsed. So we're all focusing on, can Le Pen do it? But actually, the question is, my goodness, Macron has lost so much support. And I think we maybe make a mistake of seeing a kind of left-right or any such thing. I mean, they're both on the right. Le Pen has got, dodgy antecedents and past and so on, but actually appeals more to working-class voters who feel completely abandoned by Macron. And, when we talk about the left, you might think, but, he said he's going to help the poor. And then he goes and talks to kind of the Mélenchon middle classes who are left-wing. She went and talked to lorry drivers, and I do think that we can't underestimate the split in French society, which is that no party has managed to win over the vast majority of working people in France, left or right. And I think that, understandably, people are worried about Le Pen. But you know, when he's emphasising his competence and he gets the figures, people also vote for values.
Yes.
I mean,
which was the start of our conversation right at the very beginning.
We know he's a technocrat. Well, we know he's a good technocrat and he can kind of run the economy, but what does he stand for? And what he stands for has alienated an awful lot of working-class people in France.
But the other thing, as we're inching up towards a break, but has struck me as utterly intriguing, which we haven't talked about so far, and that is the disappearance, in effect, of the old traditional right and left in the polling. It's new right, Macron, or it's new left, with our friend Macron.
The traditional right, I think they got 2% of the vote. I mean, we're talking a complete collapse of mainstream parties. And for our viewers at GB News, this is like, in 10 years' time, discovering that the Labour Party got 1.5% and that the Conservatives got 3.5%. And we're talking about completely new parties that we're having a discussion about who's going to win.
It's a conversation I'd love to have. Claire, we must leave it there for the time being. Thank you very much indeed. Lovely Claire Fox there, sharing her views on everything on this programme. You're with Alistair Stewart here on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, has the UK's largest student representative body become infected with bigotry? The Education Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi, has slammed systemic anti-Semitism within the National Union of Students. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news headlines. Here's Polly.
Alistair, thank you. Boris Johnson is to face a parliamentary investigation into whether he misled the Commons over parties held at Downing Street during lockdown. That's after there were no objections to a Labour motion which passed without a vote. The Prime Minister will now face a contempt probe by the Privileges Committee once police complete their investigation into COVID rule breaches. Well, the Prime Minister, who's in India, insists he has absolutely nothing to hide. He's currently on a trade visit to India to try to strengthen ties with the country. Meanwhile, the Met Police say there will be no further updates on Partygate fines until after May's local elections. The force says investigations into Downing Street and Whitehall parties will continue during the pre-election period, but no statements will be made public. And a mother, a stepfather and a 14-year-old boy have been found guilty of murdering 5-year-old Logan Mwangi. The child's body was dumped in the River Ogmore in Bridgend last July. John Cole and Garrod Williamson and the teenager were convicted at Cardiff Crown Court. And President Biden says there's no evidence Mariupol has completely fallen in Ukraine, despite Russia claiming victory in the southern port city. President Putin called off an attack on a steel plant where hundreds of troops and civilians are sheltering, ordering it to be blockaded instead. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News. Don't go anywhere. Alistair will be here in just a moment.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, welcome back. It's just coming up to 20 to 6 and you're with Alistair Stewart here on GB News TV, online and digital radio. Coming up, as the UK's largest student representative body has the UK's largest representative student body become infected with bigotry. The Education Secretary, Nadhim Zahawi, has slammed what he called systemic anti-Semitism within the National Union of Students. We'll be discussing that in just a moment, but first let's bring you up to date with all of the news. Here's Polly again. No, we're not. We've done that. I do beg your pardon. Let me just... Steve Silverman is joining me. I'm just trying to get the words into the right place. There we are. Here we are. Right, pause. I was supposed to read these emails out to you first of all, because Jennifer says, I really like Steve Baker. He seems a man of integrity. He was one of the few who spoke up for us in Parliament against the draconian COVID rules. I wanted to mention that one because Claire Fox mentioned it earlier as well. And James says people like Baker are handing Labour a victory. What are they doing? This is about a left-wing establishment trying to undo Brexit. It is not about integrity. There we are. I'm so sorry about that. Now, Labour and Tory front benches have both criticised the UK's largest student representative body for alleged anti-Semitism this morning. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, before I started getting it all wrong, the Education Secretary, Nadhim Zahawi, said that he's concerned over systemic anti-Semitism within the National Union of Students. Labour's Wes Streeting backed those concerns, urging the body to become more mainstream and regain the trust of Jewish students. Speaking to Parliament's committee, Zahawi said this is not the first time, it's the second time, I think, that the NUS has elected a leader who has got a history of anti-Semitic comments and statements, so that does concern me. Director of Investigations and Enforcement at the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, Steve Silverman, joins me live now. Steve, let's be absolutely crystal clear from the outset. These are not light allegations. There must be chapter and verse evidence to sustain them if they are to be made by the Secretary for Education and a leading Labour figure like Wes Streeting. Is there that evidence?
Oh, very much so, Alistair. And look, this has been a creeping problem for decades. So you can trace this back to the 1970s, when there was an attempt to remove Jewish societies from universities under the pretext of anti-fascism. Now we have a president-elect who has had to apologise for tweeting the words of a notorious anti-Semitic chant that invokes the massacre and expulsion of the Jews from a town in what is now Saudi Arabia in the year 628. Now, she apologised for that, claimed that she is a different person to who she was in 2012 when she tweeted that. But video has recently emerged of Ms. Dalali participating in a protest at King's College London in 2018, at which it is reported that the same chant was on show in the same year. She tweeted her support for a Hamas commander and for Jeremy Corbyn, who she claimed was too good for this godforsaken country. And she also declared that he should never have been suspended from Labour. So
Steve,
this is the problem.
Steve, is she the target or the NUS itself? Because I'm a former deputy president of the NUS back in the 70s, but some people I know and admire, including Trevor Phillips, also former NUS, David Aronovich, Jewish and former NUS, have written to the Charities Commission to say we want the NUS itself looked into, not this young woman who's been elected president. Is she the target or the NUS?
No, I mean, the issue is that she is symptomatic of the problems that are endemic within the NUS. Now, Campaign Against Anti-Semitism prepared a detailed dossier that sets out how the NUS has repeatedly failed Jewish students. It's available at our website, and it makes for very grim reading indeed. Robert Halfon, the Member of Parliament for Harlow, who also chairs the House of Commons Education Select Committee, has sent the dossier to the Charity Commission, accompanied by a letter in which he expressed his, and I quote, his dismay at the actions and behaviour of the National Union of Students and its trustees in regards to their treatment of Jewish students and the Jewish community's concerns regarding anti-Semitism. In the same letter, together with CAA, he called for a statutory inquiry into the NUS. Now, the NUS cannot claim to represent all students and at the same time leave one minority group marginalised and undefended from a swelling hatred.
And let me press you on one point, David, because you mentioned it earlier on, and before I bring Claire Fox into it, who's listening very carefully to what you've been saying as well. And it is this. Saying, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, or saying, I'm sorry, that was 5 years ago, is not a defence in your mind. Is it a defence in law?
Well, you would need to put that question to a lawyer. However, I think the sincerity of that apology can only be borne out by subsequent actions. And as I say, there appears to have been a pattern of behaviour that has continued until at least 2018 that casts considerable doubt over the sincerity of that apology.
OK, well, watch it with great interest, and you keep in touch with us as well, Steve Silverman. Steve is the Director of Investigations and Enforcement at the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism. So we'll see what reaction is to both Wes Streeting and Nadim Zahawi and Robert Halfon, all of them big players. Why is this different to what you and others said about the Swedish situation, where it is profoundly wrong for this bloke to go around and burning the Koran, but nobody dares speak a word of it? Because it's anti-Semitism, everybody's shouting about it from the rooftops.
The first thing that to be said is that it isn't different in as much as these are bigoted views that are being expressed in this instance about Jewish...
But the bloke who burns the Koran in Sweden has bigoted views.
No, but he's a bigot. And all I'm saying is I think that what I want to be able to call him a bigot. I don't think you should have a riot. What we're talking about here is whether we've got a problem, which is that somebody who's anti-Semitic runs the NUS. Right?
Well, that's only because more people voted for her than the other bloke.
Exactly, and I think there is a problem, which is the NUS has become increasingly disjointed, removed from student bodies. I mean, it's not a widely recognised... So many things the NUS decide, ordinary students are looking on bemused. But I think there is a bigotry.
But when I was Deputy President of NUS in the 70s, and I need to underline this very, very clearly, that as Steve just accepted and acknowledged that she has apologised for it, and, you know, that was in a different time or what have you. In the 70s, I do not remember an ounce of anti-Semitism in the National Union of Students, whether it was techs, FEs, universities or the rest of it. There were all sorts of other issues that people were uptight about, but that was an era of anti-apartheid. Anyone who talked in an anti-Semitic way would have been lobbed out by the student body.
Well, one of the things we've seen in the Labour Party, and because I'm from the left, I've witnessed it, and it's one of the most scary things that has happened, is that the intense hatred of Israel has become so visceral that it's turned into a very casual and almost cavalier way that people quickly turn it into anti-Jewish, and they don't even know they're doing it half the time. Now, this has been widely discussed in relation to Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, We see it amongst a lot of young people, and we see it, and let's be honest, we see it in a lot of Islamic societies on student campuses, and nobody will challenge it. I mean, it's one thing it happening, is when it's not challenged by the left. I've been on demonstrations, anti-war demonstrations in the past in relation to Iraq and so on, where people have been shouting anti-Jewish slogans, and left-wing activists, along with myself, but they didn't challenge it. And when you try and challenge it, they accuse you of being Islamophobic, rather than saying, well, God, they're just shouting death to the Jews. I mean, I'm allowed to say something.
Sure.
And so we've got ourselves in a right muddle.
I agree with that.
But I do want to defend the right of free speech of bigots, but we should be able to say it's bigotry nonetheless.
Brilliantly constructed argument, Claire, as always. Thank you very much indeed. Claire Fox there, reflecting upon allegations of anti-Semitism, not only by the woman who's been elected leader of the National Union of Students, but more importantly, whether it's seeped into the very structure of the NUS itself. And that's what people like my friends David Aronovich and Trevor Phillips want investigated. And all power to their elbows. Now, patients in the NHS waiting rooms in England are no longer required to socially distance. The new stepping down rules apply to NHS hospitals, GP surgeries and indeed emergency departments. Some positive news, you might think, but hundreds of thousands of patients are still stuck on NHS waiting lists. COVID rules are being removed, but could we still be dealing with those backlogs caused by COVID for years to come? Joining me now is NHS Doctor, Dr. Amika Okrasha, and thank you very much indeed, Amika, for joining us. First and foremost, I presume you, as a master of medical science and a practitioner, welcome this clarification that people coming to see you no longer have to wear masks.
So I think the problem is, I think there are going to be a lot of worried patients. The thing is, we still see a lot of patients with anxiety over COVID, and you can still catch COVID. I know we're living with COVID now, and that is the government strategy, and I do support that because I do support us getting back to normality. However, I am slightly worried about those patients who are still very anxious about people in hospitals with COVID, and they obviously are able to choose to wear masks. We as professionals are still wearing masks. I think we're going to get to a time where every kind of patient is going to have to decide their fate for themselves when it comes to COVID and what they want to do regarding it, just like they do outside of the hospital. The hospital is a very daunting time for a patient. I can only imagine how they feel. So especially if you're scared of coming in because you have a broken arm, but then there's COVID and you have to deal with the fact that you're no longer distanced and you might have the anxiety of people around you. And a lot of these people themselves have shielded for a number of months and to this day are still trying to get back into society. So I do worry from that perspective. But in terms of a hospital's perspective of getting people in hospitals seen quicker, if possible, and having people sit in the hospital waiting room, bringing a normality back to work again, I agree with it from that point of view.
I'm glad to hear that. And there is an ironic juxtaposition of those two difficulties. You said COVID is still a challenge and a problem for some people. Even if you can move up the waiting list and get an appointment in a hospital, lo and behold, you find that there are so many doctors and so many nurses off sick because they've tested positive that actually you don't get to see your doctor or your nurse.
So it's already hard enough to see a doctor in the community, or if you have an outpatient appointment in the NHS. We've had this for years, even before COVID, patients complaining that they did find difficulty getting outpatient appointments, getting GP appointments. A&E, we still have a lot of patients coming into A&E. Obviously, the services continue to run throughout COVID and will continue to run. And waiting times have always been an issue we've always tried to tackle. I think myself as an individual and the colleagues I work with, we work patient by patient, and we do have a waiting time and waiting list. We do have patients we prioritize because of, medical severity. However, that's something that's always going to continue. I think this backlog is realistically going to take a while before we can get seeing everyone. I know a number of people are going to be frustrated for a long amount of time, and that's why we advise people who have symptoms where they just can't wait at home or are sitting on symptoms that need to be seen to come straight in to see us and the emergency department, and then we can then advise them on whether or not they need to be seen quicker or speed up a referral process if possible.
Sound advice, as always. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Amika Okrasha. They're still worried.
They might be still worried. The greatest fear that I have is that the NHS is being far too slow in grasping the reality of the terrible waiting lists.
Yeah.
You know, if you're in a situation, and I know people who work in the NHS, where there are still so many mitigating anti-COVID rules, that actually they're just not getting on with what is a very serious
And
problem.
you know what? It's perfect circle, because we began the 2 hours talking about what people are really concerned about. Not Partygate. It's whether I can see my GP when I've got a problem.
Yeah, and you don't want a situation whereby, I mean, that idea, well, people are very anxious. One of my colleagues' partners was in A&E for 12 hours. I mean, never mind social distancing. If you're sitting in A&E for 12 hours, it's packed. I mean, that's unhealthy for anyone. No wonder anyone's anxious. Yeah. Stop being anxious about COVID and start being angry about the fact that we've got to make the NHS now work 3 times harder. Yeah. And that's what our government priority should be.
Given they got 12 billion more of our money than they had this time last year.
That's not even about the staff. That is about saying the most important thing now is patient care. Urgent, urgent, urgent. That's what you've got to do.
Heard loud and clear. And finally, as they say, a new portrait of Her Majesty the Queen with 2 of her beloved fell ponies has been released to mark her 96th birthday as she quietly celebrates the landmark occasion in Sandringham. You know that because it's been in Polly's news and we've already talked to Ingrid Seward about it. But it's taken in the grounds of Windsor Castle last month, and the glorious photograph shows the monarch standing with those 2 lovely ponies. But the setting is absolutely crucial, because I'm delighted to say that I first met my next guest standing in the grounds of Windsor Castle at the Royal Windsor Horse Show. He is one of the greatest voices in equestrian sport, Nick Brooks Ward, who commentates upon many of those great occasions, and also he and his business, H-Power, operate many of the great events for and on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen and the royal family to celebrate. Nick, it's so kind of you to join me. What I most want to underline through you is that this is not an amateur woman who loves cuddly ponies. This is one of the greatest experts and supporters in the entire country of equestrianism.
There's no doubt about that, Alistair, and it's great. I'm actually in the private grounds of Windsor at the moment. We're building the Royal Windsor Horse Show and the Platinum Jubilee celebrations. And you're absolutely right. Her Majesty is one of the 4 most in-depth, most knowledgeable people about horses I've ever known in history. I mean, she knows the breeding of her horses. She takes great interest. And you talk about the fell ponies that we saw on the front pages of the news, Bybeck Katie and Bybeck Nightingale. Her Majesty is such a supporter of her fells. His Royal Highness Prince Philip drove the fell ponies here at the Royal Windsor Horse Show, and that tradition has carried on through. And this year, it's tremendous that we're celebrating here at the Royal Windsor Horse Show the 100th anniversary of the Fell Pony Society, and how brilliant.
Let me butt in, only to... Let me just broaden it out slightly, because I also remember another occasion when you and I were with Sophie Wessex, the Countess of Wessex, at the Olympia Horse Show, which you've now moved to Expo, but in those glorious days when it was at Olympia. And Her Majesty, via Sophie, had invited 2 or 3 of the women whose sole jobs in life is to look after the Highland pony rare breed up at Balmoral. And there they were, front row seats.
So we've got the Highland ponies up at Balmoral, you've got the Fell ponies, you've got the Windsor Greys, you've got the Cleveland Bays, you name it. And also, Alistair, she's got one of the hot tips in the Derby this year. So, you know, what a record in horse breeding and equestrian sport. And of course, her husband, the late great Prince Philip, was president of the International Equestrian Federation. He started the sport of carriage driving, and this year at Windsor, it's the 50th anniversary of carriage driving at the Royal Windsor Horse Show. So that tradition just carries all the way through.
A perfect way to begin and to end this programme. Nick, love to the whole family, and I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Kind of you to join us.
Take care.
That's Nick Brooks Ward, Chief Executive of H-Power Group, who knows more about how to put horse shows on than literally anybody that is in the business for as long as he has been. His dad was, yes, you've guessed it, the great late Brooks Ward as well. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Claire included, over the last couple of hours. That's all that we have time for today. Up next, it's Jubes and Company, and then I'll be back here Saturday and Sunday, 12 till 2. I hope you can join me for that. First, let's give you the weather and then Jubes.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest forecast from the Met Office. Sunny spells, particularly in the north over the next 24 hours, the risk of some showers across central and southern areas. Turning quite windy as well, particularly as we move from Friday and into Saturday. The reason for this is low pressures to the south of the UK, high pressure to the north, and we're starting to see a brisk easterly wind develop across the whole of the UK. Through Thursday evening, though, the winds remain fairly light. We'll generally see clearing skies across the whole of the UK, so a dry end to the day. Though it won't be long before some low cloud mist and murk from the North Sea starts to move back further inland, spreading its way slowly westwards. The best of the clear skies will be in the west here, temperatures dipping to mid-single figures, so quite a chilly night to come, but under the cloud holding up 6, 7, 8 degrees. So a mixed start to Friday morning across the whole of the UK, largely dry, some sunshine but low cloud too. An area of cloud will move across southern parts of England and Wales as the day progresses. Some showers developing here too. One or two of those could be heavy at times, but plenty of sunshine to come across the north of the UK, the Midlands northwards. Here the sunshine will be hazy, but temperatures 16, 17 degrees, though an easterly breeze will keep it cool along the east coast, 11, 12, 13 degrees here. Through the evening time, we'll see showers fade away across the south. It will be a fairly quiet end to the day, but again, we'll see some low cloud mist and murk developing during the early hours, taking us into Saturday morning. Under any clear skies, temperatures once again dipping to mid-single figures, so generally staying frost-free, largely due to that brisk wind continuing. So windy start to Saturday morning, some sunshine, but also a lot of cloud. The cloud thick enough perhaps for the odd light shower across the Midlands, Wales, Northern England as we go through the day. Best of the sunshine across Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, mid-teens again. Looking ahead over the next few days, a lot of clouds still feeding in from the east, but temperatures respectable.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you.